Good evening. I'm Gary Hall. I'm the Dean of the Cathedral, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of Bishop Marianne Edgar Buddy, who's the Bishop of Washington, and on behalf of the Cathedral Chapter and its staff and all of those who worship with us in our congregation. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this 2013 Ignatius program. Tonight, the National Cathedral becomes an international cathedral as we journey across the globe in search of China's soul, exploring the consequences and tensions that accompany one nation's rapid expansion into our shared world. We do so thanks to the generous support from family and friends of Nancy and Paul Ignatius, who decided some years back to honor this remarkable couple with a fund that would help this cathedral live into the almost unique set of circumstances that enable us to provide thoughtful programming that considers complex and pressing matters from an ethical perspective clearly associated with religion. Our ability to serve as a powerful voice about public issues of our day is nothing new. It dates to our founding in the early part of the last century. And it's always been a high aspiration for this place to be a center of prayer for all people, a place for interfaith action and dialogue, and a worshiping community that also serves at the heart of the nation to explore the connection between theology and public life. In that regard, I owe a great deal to Nan and Paul, although neither they nor I could have predicted how this place would become once again a fairly public space in our national and local life in recent weeks. Tonight's keynote speaker, Chen Guangcheng, embodies the experience of contemporary China, and he shows the importance of speaking out. The remarkable story of this self-trained barefoot lawyer, as he was called, now at New York University, makes clear that sometimes upholding the simplest principles requires the greatest bravery. His opposition to enforced abortions and sterilizations justified by China's one-child policy came at great personal cost. It also inspired others to take action. To help add vital perspective to Chen's remarks, we are deeply honored to have with us a diverse and uniquely insightful panel. James Fallows of The Atlantic, author of books too numerous to mention, but among them Postcards from Tomorrow Square and more recently China Airborne. Mr. Fallows will moderate this discussion between the no less illustrious panel of Dorinda Elliott of Condé Nast Traveler, formerly Beijing bureau chief for Newsweek, Cheng Li of the Brookings Institution's John L. Thornton China Center, and last but certainly not least, Jerome Cohen of NYU Law School. I look forward, as do you, to an insightful discussion, sure to bring a little understood but much discussed part of our world into clear focus. And to help begin that process, I want to welcome Sarah Ignatius to the podium.
Good evening. I'm Sarah Ignatius. I'm the designated Ignatius for the evening. And thank you so much for coming. We're all thrilled to have you here, and we're thrilled about our program this evening. So just very briefly, I would like to ask my parents to stand, Paul and Nancy Ignatius. They really have inspired all of us as their children, but any of you who know them know that they never stop questioning and striving to tackle very complex national, international, political, social, moral issues. And one other fact about their accomplishments is they've just achieved their 65th wedding anniversary. So if you... All right. I will not continue on much with the introduction of our keynote. I think all of you have followed Mr. Chen's very dramatic and moving escape from China and want to hear from him directly. So I will not keep you from him with a lengthy introduction, just other than to say, how proud and humbled we all are to have him here with us. And we have a very distinguished panel, which Dean Hall has mentioned to you. So after Mr. Chen speaks, we'll turn the panel over to Mr. Fallows, who will moderate that. And our panelists will provide some of their insights on some of the issues that Mr. Chen will be raising this evening. I just very briefly want to say just a couple words. Personally, this evening really was organized primarily by my brother, Adi, who spent many years working in China as well for Newsweek and Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal. Sorry, Adi. But it also, the issues we'll be discussing tonight also have great meaning and resonate very deeply for me as well. I am a lawyer and I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization. I've spent most of my career doing the work I'm doing now of representing people who have fled from persecution in countries throughout the world and helping them to find safety and a new beginning here in the United States. And I know from my work with all of our clients, the amazing bravery and courage it takes for people to speak out at great personal risk and to endure things that the rest of us think we probably wouldn't be able to. So I feel deeply honored, very humbled to be on the stage this evening with Mr. Chen, that he has agreed to be here with us this evening. And I ask all of you to give him a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
先生们、女士们，大家晚上好。我是陈光诚。今晚我很高兴能参加Ignatius项目，并与在座各位贵宾交流，谈谈我对中国目前局势的一些看法。
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chen Guangcheng, and I'm very happy to speak today at Ignatius program and to offer my thoughts on the current situation in China to such a prestigious group.
最近，关于中国新一届领导人习近平能否进行一场政治改革的讨论不绝于耳。 许多专家也都表示乐观。中国到底是会经历一场和平的变革，还是无转型？归根到底，还是取决于习近平是否能采取措施，推进人权与法治。
There has been much discussion recently about whether or not China's new leader, Xi Jinping, will bring about political reforms. Many experts are expressing optimism. Whether China goes through peaceful change or chaos will depend on whether he takes steps to promote human rights and the rule of law.
根据我的自身经历，对一场真正意义上的政治改革， 我并不抱太大的希望。
Based on my own experiences, I don't have high expectations for any real political change.
在中国，中共由于维持政权的需要，一向凌驾于法治和基本自由之上。现在换了一个领导人习近平，这种情况看起来也不会改变。到目前为止，也没有任何迹象表示共产党会有所改变，并能为所应为。
The survival of the Chinese Communist Party has always taken precedence over rule of law and basic freedoms in China, and there's nothing to indicate that this situation will be any different under Xi Jinping. To this day, the Chinese Communist Party has not given any sign that it will change or do the right thing.
相反，中共当权者在中国仍然是人道和正义的拦路虎、绊脚石。
Instead, the party continued to pose a challenge and obstacle to humanity and justice in China.
温家宝总理频频在冠冕堂皇的演讲中提到政治改革的重要性，但当政10年，他又真正做了些什么呢？讲空话是没有用的，只有拿出实际行动才是有用的。
Premier Wen Jiabao has frequently given grandiose speeches about the importance of reform, but in 10 years in power, what has he done? Talking doesn't count. The only thing that counts is what they actually do.
当然，温家宝在中国充其量是个3把手，他的能力也有限，自身的权力也受到很大的限制，这个我们也能理解。
Of course, Premier Wen Jiabao is only the third in power, and his capability is very limited, so we can understand why he cannot do much.
很多人都知道我的故事，我亲眼目睹中国的农民、妇女和残疾人的权益被严重践踏。 为了帮他们向不义之举说不，争取自身权益，我自己也遭受迫害。
Many of you know my own story. I witnessed gross violations of the rights of farmers, women, and the handicapped in China, and suffered myself as a result of helping them say no to these violations and fighting for their rights.
2005年，我的老家山东临沂市开始打击所谓计划生育违规情况，在违反中国法律的情况下，强迫成千上万的妇女流产或做绝育手术，男人进行结扎。
In 2005, Linyi City in my native Shandong province launched a family planning crackdown that saw tens of thousands of women undergo forced abortions and sterilization against their wishes and in violation of Chinese law. Rural men were also forced to be sterilized.
我站出来为这些受害家庭提供法律咨询，讨个说法。我和我的家人也因此受到威胁和骚扰，最后还以莫须有的罪名，聚众扰乱交通秩序和故意破坏公共财物，将我逮捕并判了我4年3个月的刑期。
My family was harassed and threatened as a result of my legal advice and advocacy efforts on behalf of these families. I was arrested on trumped-up charges of blocking traffic and sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in prison.
我出狱之后，他们又以非法和残忍的手段，将我和我的家人拘禁在家，直到去年4月时，我逃出监禁。
After I served my time in prison, I and my family were placed under a brutal and illegal house arrest that didn't end until my escape in April last year.
可能大家都听说了，我几经周折才逃到北京。当时我曾经在视频里向温家宝总理清楚地表明，中央若对山东数年来的违法犯罪行为展开彻底调查，作出公开处理，便说明是地方党委政府乱权妄为；若不查，便证明是中央直接指使的。
As you probably have heard, I escaped my home, and after many twists and turns, I eventually got to Beijing. At that time, I clearly told Premier Wen Jiabao through webcam that if the central government thoroughly investigates the illegal actions by the Shandong authorities over the years and handles the case publicly, then it means it is the local government and party committee who is abusing its power. Otherwise, it means the local government is under the direct control of the central government.
在我离开中国前，中共政府高级官员向我，也向世界保证，他们会就我和我家人受到的待遇进行调查。可是，他们不仅没有做任何调查，反而在一群暴徒半夜翻墙闯入我大哥家，抓走我大哥，殴打我的侄子及大嫂之后，还将我的侄子陈可贵判刑39个月。
Before I left China, the Chinese Communist Party senior officials promised to me and the world that they would investigate the treatment of me and my family. 9 months later, they have not investigated anything. On the contrary, the Shandong authorities sent my nephew Chen Guangcheng to jail and also arrested my brother and sent my nephew to jail for 39 months after a group of thugs climbed the walls of his house and began to beat him and his mother as a retaliation for my escape.
9个月之后，中国政府还是没有进行任何调查工作。像我这样的受到广泛关注的案子，都无法按照法律来公正处理。我们又怎么能够相信共产党在向法治的方向前进呢？
After 9 months, the Chinese Communist Party hasn't investigated anything. If a high-profile case such as mine cannot be handled fairly and in accordance with the law, how can we really believe that the party is moving towards rule of law?
去年5月31号，在对外关系委员会，有人问我，共产党是否可信呢？我曾要大家拭目以待。我想，现在不用我回答了。中共守不守信，大家都看清楚了吧？
On May 31st, 2012, the Council on Foreign Relations asked me, "Is the Chinese Communist Party trustworthy?" At that time, my answer was that we need to wait and see. But now, I think the answer is clear. Everyone can see it for themselves, whether or not the Chinese Communist Party is trustworthy.
尽管法律体系在中国有所改进，每年都有新的法律法规出台，但在别的方面，法律体系实际上是在退步，法律得不到执行也是经常发生的。党政官员权力无边，使得他们可以肆意践踏法律，并不受任何制裁。
And while the legal system has improved in China, with more laws and regulations being drafted every year, the legal system in other ways is actually backsliding. Laws are often not implemented. Party and government officials enjoy unchecked power to flagrantly flaunt the law, and nothing can be done about it.
在中国，法律其实可有可无。掌权的人认为对己有利时，便使用它；不利时，便丢弃它。在中国，法律也只是喊喊口号，一纸空文。
In China, the law is optional, something that those in power use when it suits them and ignore when it doesn't. The law in China is nothing more than empty words, just scraps of paper.
因此，践踏人权、强行拆迁、腐败官员侵占土地、上访人员关入黑监狱、不明身份的人绑架、虐待德高望重的律师，用黑布套在他们头上，然后将他们推入车里，压在后座上，这样的事情还时有发生。
Thus, we see human rights abuses, forced demolitions, land grabs by corrupt officials, petitioners forced into black jails, and the kidnapping and torture of respected lawyers, who are dragged away by unidentified men who place a black hood over their heads and shove them in the back seat of an automobile.
藏人的人权被肆意蹂躏，导致过去4年100多位藏人用自焚来进行最后的抗议。
The rights of Tibetans are abused, resulting in more than 100 people setting fire to themselves in desperate protest over the past 4 years.
新疆的少数民族维吾尔人，他们说突厥语，信仰穆斯林，但他们的宗教信仰也受到严格的限制。当事件引起人们的反应时，中共又在海外寻找替罪羊，将他们称之为恐怖分子，而不是反思自己的错误。
In Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, a Turkic-speaking ethnic Muslim group, face severe restrictions on the practice of Islam. And when there is a reaction, the party looks for scapegoats outside of China and labels people terrorists rather than reflecting on its own errors.
对新教家庭教会、天主教和法轮功成员的迫害仍在继续。
The persecution of Protestant house churches, Catholics, and Falun Gong members continues.
目前中国的情况对共产党的长期稳定执政是不利的。高层官员也意识到这一点，但他们却束手无策，因为共产党紧紧抓着手中的权力， 不愿放松。
The current situation in China works against the long-term stability of the party, and senior officials are aware of this. They just can't do anything because the party refuses to relax its grip on power.
只要中共的统治者还用黑手党式的压制，而不是合理合法的手段来维持稳定，中国只会变得越来越动荡。
As long as China's rulers use mafia-like suppression to maintain stability rather than legitimacy, China will only become increasingly unstable.
中国共产党的官员表面上是领导，实际上更像是劫持国家的人。
The Communist Party officials are leaders in name only, in reality closer to our nation's kidnappers.
尽管中国的情况依然严峻，我却比较乐观，相信变革终会到来。
Despite the dire situation in China, I'm actually optimistic that change will come.
中国人民是勇敢的，赤脚律师、人权活动人士、学者、环保人士、公民记者以及各行各业的中国人都不再害怕，敢于要求自己的权利，敢打抱不平。
China is a country of brave people, barefoot lawyers, human rights activists, scholars, environmental activists, citizen journalists, and Chinese from different walks of life, people who are no longer afraid to demand their rights and fight for injustice.
而且随着互联网的普及，中国人对世界大事也了解得更多，也更愿意为正义直言。这种勇气也传播开来，他们不再害怕。中国有句俗话：“世上无难事，只怕有心人。”
And this courage is starting to spread as Chinese citizens become more aware of the issues via the internet and more willing to speak out about injustice. They're no longer afraid. According to a Chinese saying, there are no difficult tasks, but rather only people who lack the courage to act.
只要越来越多的中国人愿意站出来要求自己的权利，捍卫公义，中国的改变就是无法阻挡的。
And as more and more Chinese people speak out, demand their rights, and fight for public interest, change in China will become unstoppable.
中国民众要团结起来，为自己争取权利，而不应是指望突然有个英明的皇帝赐予我们这样的权利。
We Chinese must unite and fight for our own rights. We can't expect an enlightened emperor to suddenly appear and bestow such rights upon us.
命运掌握在自己的手中，人民已经基本觉醒，正在战胜心中的恐惧。当这些人数多到一定程度，改变将不可避免，人民不再害怕，这恰恰是让中共当权者最怕的一点。
Our fate is in our own hands. People are waking up, and they're overcoming their fears. And when this number reaches a critical mass, change will become inevitable. Nothing could scare the Chinese government more than the fact that the people are losing their fear.
在过去，威胁和暴力是有效的，但当人民不再恐惧时，威胁和暴力也失去了力量。人们不会因为威胁和暴力而晋升，相反，他们会因此而受到鼓舞。
In the past, threats and violence were effective, but when people are no longer afraid, violence and threats lose their power. Instead of silencing people, it motivates them.
自古以来，中国历届政府都无法改变中国人的善良、关怀和人性。善良是中国人骨子里的东西，可能也是所有世界人骨子里的东西。
Since ancient times, governments in China have failed to extinguish the flames of kindness, compassion, and humanity that stir within the Chinese people. This current of kindness runs strong in China and throughout the world.
经历了中共60多年的严酷统治，这种善良却又渐渐地聚集起来，成为一种强大的力量。我相信，中国将来一定会拥有一个维护宪法的政府和一个法治公正的公民社会，这只是时间问题。但我也希望这种变革不要让我们等太久。
And after more than 6 decades under harsh communist rule, this kindness is slowly but surely building again, becoming a powerful force. I'm confident that China will move towards a more constitutional government and a society under the rule of law. It is just a matter of time. I only hope this transformation won't take too long.
人们经常问我，国际社会能做些什么帮助中国推进民主与法治？我诚挚地希望世界各地的人们不要因为中国似乎变富裕了、变强大了，就不敢得罪中共了。在中国，到处有人遭受虐待，我希望人们不要对此视而不见，也不要认为任何人只要敦促中国政府遵守自己制定的法律，就会被报复，就会被当成是国家的敌人。
I'm often asked what the international community can do to help promote democracy and rule of law in China. I sincerely hope that people around the world will lose their fear of offending the Chinese Communist Party because it seems to have become rich and powerful. I want people to stop turning a blind eye to the abuses that people throughout China are suffering. Stop supporting the myth that anyone who urges the Communist Party to abide by their own laws will be retaliated against and be treated as an enemy of the state.
不要将中国统治者会不会高兴作为行动的前提。之所以有不得不如此的感觉，是因为你们的关系走入了误区。
Don't do anything based on whether China's rulers will be pleased or not. Otherwise, your relationship with the ruling Chinese party is mistaken.
我希望你们能够大力支持宪政民主、法治和自由人权这些基本价值。我也希望奥巴马总统和别的国家领袖能进一步强调中国的人权问题。
I hope you will support the basic values of constitutionalism, democracy, rule of law, freedom, and human rights. I also hope that President Barack Obama and the leaders of other countries will continue to emphasize human rights in China.
外国记者也能出一己之力，可能记者朋友们自己都不知道，其实你们的报道给中共带来了很大的压力，尽管中国的领导人不承认这一点，但事实就是这样。
Foreign journalists can also do their part. They may not know it, but their reporting puts a great deal of pressure on the Communist Party. Although the Chinese leadership pretends that this has no impact on them, it most certainly does. That's the truth.
国际社会的支持能给中国带来平稳的过渡。
The support of the international community will help to bring about a smooth transition in China.
最后，我要谢谢国内外的各位朋友，感谢你们为了中国的自由、人权、法治、民主和正义仗义直言。当维权人士被绑架、殴打、虐待时，当我们觉得已经快坚持不住的时候，知道还有许多人记得我们所做的事情，给了我们继续斗争的力量。
In conclusion, I would like to thank the people at home and around the world who have spoken out for freedom, human rights, rule of law, democracy, and justice in China. When rights activists are abducted, are beaten and tortured, at times when we feel we don't have the strength to continue, it is the knowledge that people outside have not forgotten us, have not forgotten what we have done, that keeps us going.
谢谢大家。
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
谢谢。
Good evening, everyone. My name is James Fallows from the Atlantic magazine. Before saying anything else, I'd like to express the sentiment I believe everyone in this wonderful cathedral is feeling right now of the extraordinary privilege of hearing from Chen Guangcheng and knowing this is a moment we will always remember to have been here and heard. for making this evening possible. Of course, we're grateful not simply to Mr. Chen and the people who've made his visit here feasible, but to Reverend Gary Hall and the whole staff at the Cathedral, to the Ignatius family, which I've had the honor and privilege of being a virtual member of for many decades, and I'm glad to be here in this capacity, and of course to the panelists who you'll have the pleasure of hearing for the next few moments. And I think that I couldn't, if I, in my role as journalist, were picking people I'd like to interview to hear what they thought about the presentation we've heard from Chen Guangcheng, it would be Dorinda Elliott, Chung Lee, and Jerome Cohen, who you've heard introduced. The way I'd like to begin this discussion is not by having a set of panel speeches, but rather just asking questions and hearing the areas where our panelists agree with what they've heard from Chen Guangcheng, where they might disagree, what the implications are for the friends of China and the friends of Chinese democracy around the world. We heard anyone who has dealt with China is familiar, of course, and comfortable with contradiction and paradox and uncertainty and lack of knowledge. We heard this posed in particularly sharp form in Mr. Chen's speech, where he was, on the one hand, presenting a very grim perspective of the difficulties he thought that the Communist Party faced in making good on any of its talk of reform or rule of law. On the other hand, quite an optimistic perspective about the inevitability of the Chinese public realizing the rights that it is entitled to. So I'd like to start by asking Chung Lee first, our one Chinese-born member of the panel, whether he agrees on this assessment from Chen Guangcheng on the tensions, the contradictions, the rigidity within the party, but the inevitable forces for change. If you think that's a correct assessment, and how you think this tension will be resolved.
Well, China is a paradox of hope and fear. That certainly demonstrates in Mr. Chen's remarkable speech. Before I answer that question, I want to say a few words to Mr. Chen. And you really provide very strong moral power. And you provide the Enlightenment. We may call this third movement of Enlightenment. If the first one is May 4th movement in China in the 1919, last century. The second one is that in the wake of the Cultural Revolution and talk about humanity. And the third one, I believe, is the movement for constitutionalism. You provide the light for that movement, although at the moment it still faces a lot of difficulties. You are my hero, and thank you so much for that remarkable speech. Now, I agree with basically 99% of the assessment. The only thing is that let me also highlight some of our agreement. I think we too much put on individual leaders. And the problem is that China needs to establish a political system to accommodate the rapidly changing society. Now, I want to start with an anecdote, just use an anecdote to make my point. In the middle of the cross-Pacific flight, the pilot announced to the passengers that he has good news and bad news. The good news, he said, we're ahead of schedule. The bad news is we are lost. Now, this is a metaphor to describe, in my view, the best metaphor to describe today's China. The country has had 2 or 3 decades remarkable economic growth. And it's the first country to recover from the financial crisis. This is part of a theme. We talk about also search for China's soul, start with the money. So China become rich. But it seems to be fair to say that China seems to be lost in terms of political direction it's heading. It's yet to find a sound, safe, sustainable political system to accommodate ever-changing society and rapidly growth economy. So we know that China's economy slowed down a little bit recently, largely because partly because of the Eurozone problem, hurt China's export, but mainly because of China's political bottleneck. So we need to establish a political system sound system, democracy, rule of law, and media openness. Now, but at the same time, I also want to emphasize individual leaders, despite maybe they're less important in the structure, still will make a difference. Bo Xilai and Wen Jiabao are completely different leaders in terms of their values, in terms of their attitudes, in terms of the emphasis, in terms of the view of the Cultural Revolution. Just like Mao and Deng are quite different leaders, although they're all called communist leaders. So therefore, we should not completely lose hope for Xi Jinping, because now it's still his honeymoon period, that he demonstrated some of the promises, some of the progress, like his trip to southern China, emphasizes reform and openness, and also that he actually used his power to stop the labor camps. This is illegal imprisonment. It's a unique system in China. And also he has a remarkable speech at the 30th anniversary of the amendment of the Constitution, talk about the importance of rule of law, very much similar to Mr. Chen, what you said about just the implementation, not just something on the paper. Now, whether he will deliver, we do not know. Now, people in China say that he is a Deng Xiaoping. I think probably it's difficult to say, another Deng Xiaoping emerged because it's a historical condition. But it is fair to say he may become China's Jiang Jingguo, or mainland China's Jiang Jingguo, the former leader of Kuomintang. Also a princeling, come from prominent family. The father was the president. And all of a sudden, lift a ban on martial law and media censorship and started the democratic process. So time will tell us whether he will become Jiang Jingguo with an open political system. It's a still early stage. I'm still hopeful on that ground.
Thank you. So, Durin Elliott, I'm now going to ask you, you've been familiar with China since your days as a student, when you went there for language training, East Asian Studies. You've worked there as a journalist. You're now involved in ongoing studies of it. You heard Chen Guangcheng's perspective of the dark, immediate prospect and the inevitable brighter future. You've heard from Chung Li about the things which are knowable and not. How do you assess this balance?
I guess, well, first let me just say how incredibly awed I am to be here at all tonight. And obviously listening to Mr. Chen is just amazing. All of you here are my heroes. And I also should say, just in terms of full disclosure, that I am the second Ignatius designate, that I'm an Ignatius daughter-in-law. So I'm really thrilled to be here. But
we view that as a plus.
Anyway, I think that I also agree with what Chen has to say, but I think that it's going to be really hard for China to change. I think that there's a major debate underway right now in China, remarkably actually, amongst intellectuals about there must be reform. We've come to the end of the road. We can't continue this way. The economy will not be able to continue unless we have some political reforms, et cetera. And the fact that that debate is happening at all is amazing. But I think the vested interests in China these days, that when you look at, even Wen Jiabao, who talked about the former premier, who talked about political reform, well, his family has $2.7 billion worth of personal assets. And Xi Jinping, the new leader, his family has $500 million worth of personal assets. All of this money came while they were in office. And whether or not they're personally corrupt, it doesn't really matter. It just is, it kind of reflects the level of corruption and the level of vested interest. And there's so many people who have gotten rich off of the system that exists now that I think it's going to be very hard to change. One final thing is I would add to that, though, that I think it's important not to have a static view of China. Because as Chung Li said, there was the May 4th movement, tons of conversation about humanism and democracy, and in some ways, an Enlightenment, basically. And that was the first time that China started discussing sort of the need to leave feudalism behind. And then that was kind of snuffed out by the communist revolution. It reemerged in the 1980s when I was living there, and there was this incredible conversation about humanism and democracy and science and all these things that, again, got snuffed out after the crackdown in 1989 on the student movement, and I would argue, we'll go back to this later, but I would argue that that was a real crossroads, that was could have been a real turning point for China. But, maybe that's emerging, maybe it's happening now again. There is a lot of intellectual discussion.
So, Jerome Cohen, you've been involved directly and for a long time in the struggles we heard about in Mr. Chen's speech, with him directly as one of his patrons for coming to the for getting out of China, and in the broader struggle for rule of law within China. How do you assess these tensions between a system that has to change and can't change?
Well, first of all, I want to say I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Ignatius family. Perhaps I wish I had been, but we're certainly grateful to them for putting this program on. Secondly, I should say, for 7.5 years, while Chen Guangcheng was locked up, one way or another, we never could have dreamed we'd have a night like this. So this is a great moment. Now, the question of leadership. Professor Chung Lee is one of our great experts on the role of leadership, and I hesitate even to supplement what he said. But leadership makes a difference. Chen is quite right. The people of China are increasingly bubbling up. The internet, social media, education, international contact, travel, all of these things are having an impact. They're increasingly aware of their rights. Also, there is a class we shouldn't neglect: the educated, the middle class, the officials, the academics, the business people. They are all now festering under this oppressive regime, and they are increasingly eager, even though many of them are beneficiaries of the system so far. They're increasingly eager to improve. I deal a lot with law reformers. China has a huge number of devoted law reformers. What China has been lacking now is people at the top. China's economic reforms, China's entry into the WTO, was sparked by a strong leader, Prime Minister Zhu Rongji. He was a tough guy. I'm glad I didn't work for him because he was an unforgiving boss. But the fact is, he risked everything to beat down the state-owned enterprises and others who opposed reforms required to get into the WTO, and Prime Minister Zhu knew that would strengthen China's economy. What we have lacked in the field of human rights, rule of law, is a similar leader or leaders. One leader can't do it. We can't put our faith in Xi Jinping, but we can put our faith, perhaps, if not this time, next time, when 5 of the 7 members of the Standing Committee of the Politburo will step down in 2018. That will be a time for generational change. That will be a time when a group of leaders will say to themselves, we better see what Taiwan did in 1987, 88. When I first went to Taiwan in 1961, Chiang Kai-shek's son, who was the head of his secret police, was a notorious killer. In 1985, 86, 87, as Professor Chung Lee has indicated, he began to think he knew he was on the way down. His health was bad. How long can you use oppression to fight change? When should institutional change come about to accommodate a rising tide, a demand for democracy and human rights? And unlike Deng Xiaoping, who was great on economics, who was terrific on bringing Hong Kong into the fold, but Deng Xiaoping was a Stalinist when it came to repression, human rights included. But Jiang Jingguo followed a different route. And there will be, if not 5 years from now, 10 years from now, in the lifetime of Mr. Chen Guangcheng, there will be a group of leaders so sensible that they will see they're either going to lose power or they're going to make accommodation. But so many things are unknown. Will there be some international incident in the near future that may put China on a different line, that may exacerbate the current wave of nationalism, that will repress any thought of human rights in the name of national unification? And what role will we play? Our role is crucial, and the role of other countries. It may not be the most crucial element, but it's very important. And what will we do? Chinese people benefit from the internet in many ways. One way is they learn a lot more about us. We have a free press. We're very vulnerable. All our mistakes, all our dirty laundry is washed in public. And unless we improve our own human rights record, which has been tarnished in the last dozen years or so, we're not going to be as important in influencing the Chinese people as we would like to be. I think the most profound thing ever said, perhaps in international politics, was said by Robert Burns, the Scottish poet. Oh, would the Lord this gift he give us to see ourselves as others see us. So we have to get our own house in order. At the same time, we have to be helpful to China.
I have a long list of questions. A long list of questions about possible sources of change and possible resistance to change in China, but in fear of missing some of the major points, I'm going to sacrifice coherence to get to some main points. Next thing I'm going to ask each of you is, the announced topic of our conversation this evening is the search for China's soul. One of the most moving part of Mr. Chen's speeches was talking about the spirit of Chinese people. They are brave people. They have kindness. This is, I think, news to the outside world because through the era of economic development, we've thought of China as essentially being a soulless state, of a state of economic animals, if you will, of just concentrating on GDP, and people's demands are, they don't care about anything else if they're having full employment. How do you see the development of the soul of the Chinese people at this period in history, and how will it flower? Do you share Mr. Chen's optimism about this part of Chinese civilization reestablishing itself?
Well, absolutely. That last year was a quite eventful year for China. Not only Chen Guangcheng's story, but before that, there's a Bo Xilai scandal. This is one of the rising stars in Chinese political system, who was involved in a lot of wrongdoings, womanizing, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice, and the trial is still yet to come. So certainly that's a wake-up call for the country. How that kind of leader stay in power for so long? Some of the bad things he conducted already 20 years ago or 10 years ago, he can survive and continue to emerge. The other part is about corruption, the rampancy of corruption. And another case is yet to be tried. It's related with the railroad minister and the bureau chief. The bureau chief, according to the Chinese official media, Global Times, they found his bank account in Switzerland, the United States, totaling $2.7 billion. Now, you mentioned about the Wen Jiabao things. It's not verified. It's still debatable, in my view. But that one is from Chinese official media for bureau chief. Now, his boss, Minister of Railroad, is also arrested for 2 years. We do not know how much money he's stolen from the state. But he has a nickname called Mr. 4%. So in every railroad deal, he got 4%. Now, China's railroad is the fastest growing industry. It's a high-speed railroad. It makes China proud and make our railroad system very much like third world railroad system. But that system is on deficit because this kind of stealing, of course, is on deficit. So that kind of corruption, really, it's unparalleled, unprecedented in China's history, maybe arguably unparalleled in today's world with this kind of billions in each and every cases. So certainly that undermine the moral, high ground of the Communist Party. You can say that probably there's no moral bottom line when it comes to the murders, assassinations, this kind of conspiracy. Now, at the same time, the Bolshevik case is probably the greatest challenge since 1989 Tiananmen. But the interesting thing is Chinese society and economy have not been disrupted as 24 years ago. The question is why? The reason is precisely Mr. Chen described, is societal forces are very, very powerful, become increasingly powerful. Those forces are now very active in China, did not exist 24 years ago. Entrepreneurial group, middle class. When I wrote my first book in middle 1990s, it's about the rise of middle class in Shanghai. The book was rejected by several publishers. They said there's no such thing called middle class in China. But now it's a fact, it's a given. Legal professions. When I left China in 1985, the whole country with 1 billion people only has 3,000 lawyers. But now each year, China's 620 law department produce 100,000 law school graduates. The speed is faster than the United
for China,
States.
That's still good. U.S.
Probably, yeah, but that's a change. Yeah. Media, commercialize the media, and some of the newspaper like Southern Weekly, like some other really pushed the envelope. The quality of journalism, despite the censorship, is very, very high. Social media is a new thing. Now these forces could provide stabilizing forces. Now let's come to the point Mr. Chen raised about democracy, about necessity and feasibility for China moving towards democracy. Now if democracy lead to chaos, there's no incentive for people in China to pursue democracy. So that's a myth. Some of the elites try to impose the people, largely protect their own interests. But these are the stabilizing force. China can gradually move in that direction with the change in the structure in the leadership as well, particularly start with judicial independence, legal reform. So that's a paradox, that's a tensions. And I think it really is a time of race, which goes first. And if the leadership really use force to crack down all these positive forces, then you really have a serious problem, and the social uprising is a possibility. But I think the leadership should seize the opportunity to really go along with the change, to be the right side of history.
And Dorinda, let me follow on this. You were living in China and reporting there during a previous sort of moral uprising in the 1980s. You've seen the effects since then. You know the thoroughgoing corruption of almost all levels of Chinese life now. How do you see the prospects for a Chinese soul emerging in this situation?
A couple of quick thoughts. One is just personal anecdotes. I was just in China last week for a couple weeks, and firstly, I would say that I was talking mostly to sort of architects, artists, intellectuals, non-political people. And there was a lot of conversation about what's happened to our country, how horrible it is, a tremendous sense of kind of dismay and disgust at what was going on. So there's that conversation going on. A couple of quick things about children. One 5-year-old that I heard about, I don't know if that's coming from me, a 5-year-old, a woman I was talking to me described her 5-year-old's life. And her 5-year-old goes to kindergarten from 8:15 to 5:15 every day. And on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, after she gets out of school at 5:15, she goes to a class until 7:30. One of them is 1 day is for pinyin, to learn how to write English for Chinese. The second day is dance class, and she said that the school was quite professional, so it's quite a serious dance class. The third day is there's a so-called psychological expert comes to their school to talk to the kids about how to interact with each other, because all the kids in China are only children. And I don't think you can underestimate I don't really know what that's going to mean in the future of China, but you can't really underestimate the importance of the fact that it is a country of only children. And I just thought that was really weird. And then on Saturdays, what happens to this poor child is she goes to an advanced math class all day long, and the teacher will not let the children into the class, 5-year-olds, unless they already know how to add 3-digit numbers together, 224 plus 139, etc. And so her daughter can do that, plus she works on the abacus. And after her class on Saturday, which ends at 5:15, she then has her weekly piano lesson. So I heard this and I thought, my God, what kind of a life is this? And what does this mean about it? And this is not atypical. I mean, what the parent said to me is, I know this is crazy, I know this isn't good for my child, but everybody is doing this, and so if I don't do it, then my kid won't be able to keep up. So there's this kind of incredible pressure that Chinese children feel from the age of 5. But the other thing I would say in terms of searching for a soul is I went to the Confucius Temple in Suzhou. And at the Confucius Temple, which was mostly, there weren't a lot of people there that day, but I heard children's voices and went into a room in the front of the temple, and there was a class of maybe 10-year-olds with a young teacher. The teacher must have been 25 years old, and she was teaching the Confucian analects to the children. And there's been a lot of conversation in China about whether, the government is, of course, happy to exploit Confucianism as a kind of a way of explaining the preservation of its power and stability. But at the same time, on another more profound level, people are kind of thinking about things like Confucianism. Are there values, are there good values in those traditions that we can reach back into and to try to restore some sense of a value system? I mean, you've got a complete and total spiritual and value vacuum in China right now, which I find terrifying, but people are really talking about it a lot.
Before turning this with a variation to Jerome Cohen, I'll tell my parallel brief anecdote. I've been going to factories in China forever, and a couple of months ago I finally got into the big Foxconn works in Shenzhen, the biggest, where about 230,000 people work each day. And the biggest surprise to me of that factory was not its relative modernity and safeness compared to a lot of others. It was the fact that the workforce was, number one, very heavily male now in comparison to the female workforce of a few years ago, because the women had better opportunities. And number two, these weren't country people anymore. They didn't have that weathered look of people come in from the farm. They were the children of people who'd come in from the farm, and they were wearing all these fancy hairdos, and they were just having a different approach to life, suggesting a whole different, perhaps not soulfulness, but at least modernity, and looking for more than just that paycheck. The version of the question I'll turn to you, Jerome Cohen, is anything you'd like to say on this question of soulfulness in China now? But also, I'd like you to segue into the role that you think that dissidents can play as people who can change the Chinese system. The cynical interpretation of the heroic drama last year when Mr. Chen left China for NYU is that he was better for China on the outside than on the inside, and that when people leave, then they can become, their influence naturally abates. What is the role, how can dissidents be most effective in making change in China?
Great. Well, first about the soul. This month, the People's Daily, the official mouthpiece of the Chinese Communist Party, came out with a special editorial condemning universal values, saying China is different. China doesn't need universal values. Now that's odd because China voluntarily has ratified and adhered to over 20 human rights documents confirming that China shares all these human rights values against torture, for example, in favor of economic, social, cultural rights. And yet the People's Daily seems to regret what has been going on since the late 80s with China's formal participation in the world. For over 20 years, we were separated from China. And one of the questions some of us had was, what changes had occurred in Chinese values in the 50s and 60s and the early 70s? And I remember in February '79, the Ministry of Finance invited me to work with their tax people because China wanted foreign investment, and they needed a tax law that was credible and creditable in Washington. And we were met at the airport by the Chinese officials. There was a huge line to go through immigration, but they whisked us into a special channel. And from the back of the line, 60-year-old Chinese man with a crew cut shouted, "不公平，他们应该排队," saying, it's not fair, they ought to stand in line too. I was very embarrassed, but I was very grateful. This demonstrated that despite our 3 decades almost of separation, there was one value we shared. What the Supreme Court says on top here in Washington, equal justice under law. One of the most profound sentiments in Chinese public opinion is equal treatment. And this is acting against the Chinese Communist Party today, and it's part of the popular hatred of corruption. Now, corruption is eating away at this regime the way it ate away at Chiang Kai-shek's regime before 1949. But these people are clever. They're exposing it, but highly selectively, because the elite has too much at stake to uniformly pursue it in an equal justice way. But there are other things they can't suppress. And one factor we must keep in mind is the environment. Today, again, the terrible pollution has returned to Beijing. And that affects the leaders, even though they have special machines to clear their air. It affects them in an inescapable way. It's totally equal, and the environment may be the one factor, more than corruption, that will tear up the pea patch here, because it's less politically sensitive. You can be totally loyal to the regime. You can be against free speech even, but you want clean air and you want a government that will be responsive. Now, the internal security system now costs China more than national defense. In other words, the secret police, the regular police, and all their hoodlums and associated people. This is a huge expense, and the leadership sees it has created a Frankenstein. That's why the head of the political legal system, who used to be a member of the Standing Committee, his successor now is not a member of the Standing Committee of the Politburo, because like Beria during the Soviet post-Stalin era, the guy became too dangerous. They thought he was allying with Bo Xilai. Would there be some kind of an internal coup? So even the leadership has come to fear their political legal surveillance system, which is now all-encompassing. It's worse, I think, in the last 7, 8 years than we would have anticipated. There's been a reversal against legal progress, not in the form of legislation. Legislation continues to come out. A very impressive criminal procedure law just went into effect January 1st. But enforcement, lawlessness is much worse now than it was 7 or 8 years ago. Now, this interesting question, and we have this as Exhibit A tonight, can dissidents from China survive in America in terms of their influence? Until Mr. Chen got here, the record is very poor. I remember saying to Prime Minister Li Peng the first time he came here in '92 after the June 4th, '89 incident, why don't you let Wei Jingsheng out of jail? I said, if he's out of jail, he will no longer be a thorn in the side of US-China relations. He'll be here 2 weeks and he'll be forgotten. These people can't cope with America. But Chen Guangcheng, we hope, is different. And being here tonight is part of the evidence that he's different. And when his book comes out, and there'll be more press conferences, etc., he will show a year, 2 years after he's here, that he can survive as an important influence. And you see, in terms of his personality, as well as his intelligence, why he can. But he really doesn't want to be a dissident. That's the irony. He didn't call for the overthrow of the Chinese communist regime when he was in China. He wanted them to carry out their own laws. He's a supporter of government. Like many of us, he's afraid of revolution. Wherefore, what the Chinese communists have condemned in terms of peaceful evolution. They're against peaceful evolution. Well, what society can progress in a satisfactory way if it is against peaceful evolution? I remember there was a play in New York years ago called Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. They can't get off, and they don't know what to do.
And let me just...
Yes, go ahead.
If I could just jump in and add to what Jerry was just saying, that the idea of peaceful evolution, it's happening already. I mean, Weibo in China, the kind of Chinese version of Twitter, is so incredibly powerful, and there is this very, very powerful sense of justice and growing sense of justice in China. One of my favorite examples of Weibo is what they call human flesh searches. And it started last August when there was a tanker collided with a bus in Shanxi province, and the Shanxi Work Safety Administration guy showed up on the site, and somebody photographed him smiling at the event, and they posted it on Weibo. And I don't know why he was smiling, but what they of course said that was terrible, but what they then noticed was that he was wearing a very, very expensive watch that was worth something like $30,000. And so what then happened was Chinese people on Weibo started finding other photographs of him, and they started posting. There was another photograph of him wearing a $63,000 Vacheron watch, and then there was another photograph of him wearing another $25,000 watch, and all of which was on a salary of $15,000. So, people in China know about this stuff, and they are very, very concerned about, the sense of justice. At the time when this stuff happened on Weibo, I love the fact that the editor of the Global Times in China, which is part of the People's Daily Group, so it's, conservative Communist Party editor, and the quote, he was quoted in the paper saying that this event reflects the pathetic truth that our government's credibility is disappearing very quickly. The government should do something to change this. So it's out there. People know that something's got to change.
It's a lot of the environmental editorials now, too.
Absolutely.
Our time is drawing down. I want to get to one other very important part of Mr. Chen's speech, which was the ending with its invocation to friends of China around the world, and how the United States in particular, both its people and its leadership, should address this contradictory situation of wanting to be supportive of the people, working with the government, but critical of certain aspects of the government. How do you see, starting with you, Cheng-Li, what is the way the United States, both government and companies, should manage this balance? Should they be like Google in withdrawing their operations there? What is the balancing act they should pursue?
Well, I think to answer this question, we should first know there are three myths or misperceptions in China regarding U.S. attitudes toward China. One is the widely spread belief that the United States wants to put China down by supporting various
these are myths believed in China.
Correct. Yeah. By leaders and to a certain extent by general public, and also by some intellectuals as well. Not everyone, but there's some market over there. The second view is about you guys, those Westerners, want to only show your moral superiority, cultural superiority, and patronizing China. This is another critique. The third one is that the U.S. policy is driven purely by self-interest, particularly by companies' interest to making money, and part of conspiracy. Now, we should really challenge each and every of these misperceptions one by one. I just wrote a memo to President Obama for his second term. In that, I said very clearly that the U.S. policy should more explicitly articulate to the Chinese people both the long-standing goodwill. We do have the goodwill for long-standing, for the history, the World War II, the openness of China, and etc. And also that, that the Americans' firm commitment to democracy, human rights, rule of law, and the media openness, which the United States believe are fundamental to the long-term stability of any given country. Now, our support to Chinese democracy, human rights, are not due to our disrespect for Chinese people, but actually due to our respect. It's the universal values. It's a belief Chinese just no more, no less than others who are capable to pursue democracy, rule of law, constitutionalism. So this is really due to our respect for Chinese people. I think it will resonate very well. And also, yes, the United States has a self-interest in maintaining global economic sustainability and the regional security in Asian Pacific. But that's also the interest of China. You benefit from the international system. It's your best interest for regional security, stability, and etc. Now, also, as Jerry mentioned earlier, we should share with Chinese, our own long journey towards rule of law and democracy. Which is not easy. It's a constant, painful fight. And so, I was born in China and become American citizen. So I personally, benefited both, becoming American and at the same time also understand the tremendous challenges, to fight for equal rights and in a nation that very much an immigrant nation. Now Chinese leaders talk about the China dream. Sounds like just like American middle class dream, but they miss a very important component. The American dream is not just about the money, not just about the middle class status, but about the freedom, liberty, equality as a nation of immigrants. But that should be part of the Chinese dream: social justice, dignity, equality, democracy. But unfortunately, at the moment when Chinese leaders talk about China dream, just talk about the wealth, not the other component. I think that could resonate well if we communicate that way through our own lessons, through our own respect and humility, that I think Chinese people could understand. So far, we have not done much. I think we should do more aggressively.
So, Jerry Cohen, do you think we're managing this balance correctly? What else should the United States do to better project this complex set of values?
Well, there's no doubt President Obama in his first term could have done much more, as Mr. Chen often emphasizes, to show the people of China where we stand. But the fear of alienating China, because it's so important to so many other facets of the dealings with them, including nuclear survival, that's also a human right. So there inevitably has to be a balance. But many of us feel he can do more, and we hope in his second term he will. But I see a crisis now approaching. We're witnessing a possible train wreck in our international relations. We're watching the two great powers of East Asia, China and Japan, increasingly rigid, coming to a struggle over their refusal to try to settle their disputes over this 8 piles of rock that are so important strategically and economically in the East China Sea, by finding some neutral forum to impartially resolve their dispute. Each says, I'm right, and therefore don't challenge me. And by the way, keep out of the way when I send my aircraft over and my ships. China may have a pretty good claim to those islands. Many people underestimate it because of the way China has pursued it so aggressively. In the South China Sea, I think China's claim for this 9-dotted line is absurd. It has no firm legal basis, and they should be afraid to have it challenged. But they are going to have it challenged. The Philippines is just now trying to take them to the Law of the Sea Tribunal. And China's facing a very tough choice. It can thumb its nose at the tribunal, or it, in confidence about its rightness on the law, can accede to the jurisdiction of the tribunal. This is going to be a very important turning point for China. For 20 years, China contemned our international system because we excluded it. After China entered the UN in October '71, for 40 years, China has strived to be part of the international system, a player, not just obedient to the rules, but trying to shape them, but within the community. But now we may be entering a third period where China, because of nationalism and self-righteousness, may alienate the very countries it's been trying to cultivate for the last 20 years. China is its own worst enemy right now. It's not the US pivot toward Asia, although that was awkwardly done, that is really responsible for the Southeast Asian countries and Japan, South Korea's fear of China. It's the way China has handled its international relations. So there's not only a crisis of domestic law in China, there's a crisis of international law, which will in turn have an impact on domestic law and progress in China. So I'm really worried about that.
So you want to follow that?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in to say that I think China is still struggling with this sense of humiliation that the country endured back in the Opium Wars. And, you just endlessly hear people talking about the need for face. I mean, I was talking to a moderate, maybe sort of liberal historian in Suzhou, and everybody is talking about the Japan thing right now in China, by the way. I mean, and there's a lot of talk about war. It's really scary. And this guy says, 美国太不给面子. You know, America is so not giving us face. And it's this sense of we need to have face. The other thing is I went to see a calligraphy. You know, the power of this rising sense of nationalism, I think, is really scary. I went to see a calligraphy guy and just wanted to talk to him about calligraphy and, you know, making chops, seal chops. And I asked him, so what happened to you during the Cultural Revolution? Knowing that, of course, he suffered. People who were interested in those kinds of traditions. This is speaking to what Cheng Li was just saying about the Chinese misunderstanding of our concern for people who suffered. And he says, oh, there you go. You in America, you're not so great. You know, you've got lots of problems with your democracy too. And I had come to talk about calligraphy, and he ends up, I get this lecture from him about Japan and China and the United States being, you know, bragging all the time and all this stuff. So it's a very, very strong current right now.
And you have a short addition to this?
With it all, there's one consoling grace. For 20 years, many of us wondered, did communism deprive the Chinese people of their traditional great sense of humor that often overlaps with American sense of humor despite linguistic difficulties? And what we found instead, communism had not deprived them of their sense of humor, but had provided them with a lot more material for the sense of humor to work on.
Great. And you have a Chinese joke, right?
Well, it's not a Chinese joke, but a quote which probably echo what Mr. Chen Guangcheng said earlier. We see the tensions between short-term pessimistic view of China, but a long-term optimistic view. But I think that Winston Churchill once said he wanted to make a distinction between optimist and a pessimist. He said, I quote, an optimist sees an opportunity in every calamity, and the pessimist sees a calamity in every opportunity. So I hope that we and the Chinese leaders and the Chinese people are all optimists.
Great. I'm going to end with a request for a very short answer from each of our panelists to the following paired questions. You're all great experts on China. You're all American citizens. So in your role as great experts on China, I'd like you to tell this crowd of mainly Americans the main thing they should understand about China you think they don't understand about China. What's the main thing that you think they need to know? And in your role as Americans, I'd like you to tell Mr. Chen the main thing you wish he would understand, he would know about America during his time here. I'm going to start with you, Cheng Li.
Well, I think that the term China expert is misleading. I think there's no such a person called China expert. There's only China specialist. We only focus on very small, tiny bit of things. So the wonderful things is that we learn every day, every time. Just like the United States, I also still learning about American democracy, American culture. I think this kind of give a sense of humility, give a sense of perspective. That's a really privilege, and I'm very, very grateful.
Thank you. Dorinda.
I guess what I would want to say about China is that it's much more modern than I think most Americans think, just in terms of the way people think. They're all on Twitter. They're all aware of what's going on in the world. It's a very modern place in many, many ways. It's much more like America than people think. It's, you know, people are not that dissimilar. I mean, back to the conversation about human values, you know, people want the same things. They want justice, and they want, you know, the system to be fair, and they want to be able to breathe fresh air. And lastly, I would say it's much funnier than Americans think. I think China is hilariously funny. I'm always laughing all the time when I'm there because Chinese are so funny. And as you said, they've got a lot of good material.
And did you have any advice to Mr. Chen during his time in America?
I need to think about that one a little bit.
Yes.
I would emphasize how unmodern over half of China is.
Also true.
maybe only 600 or 700 million people. But it's a very poor place per capita. What we see as a fierce and successful economic power is a very, very poor place once you get out of the increasing urban life, which is now half of the Chinese population. But a good part of the urban people are very poor, migrant laborers. So the country is very poor. The people are more sophisticated than they are wealthy. We have to keep that in mind. For my friend Chen, I would say he ought to try to meet as many Americans as possible and be helpful to them and understand how diverse we are and how little we know about his country.
So, So on behalf of my fellow panelists, I'd like to thank all of you for attending. I'd like to thank the National Cathedral for having this event. I'd like to thank the Ignatius family for making it possible. And above all, I'd like to thank Chen Guangcheng for what he's done this evening and through his life.